The diagnostic sequence concluded with a soft, three-note chime that echoed in the metallic silence of the bridge. On the main screen, the string of green text confirmed what I already knew: all systems nominal. I ran a hand through my short-cropped hair, the gesture more habit than a sign of stress. On day 64 of a 365-day contract, stress was a luxury I couldn't afford. Routine was the only thing keeping the slow, creeping madness of deep space at bay. "Log entry, day 64, I said to the empty room. My voice sounded thin against the persistent low hum of the life support systems. "Sarah Brooks, technician, relay station, Nereid. Completed weekly deep system diagnostic. No anomalies detected. Signal latency to Proxima Colony is stable at 0.02%. Everything's quiet." The station's computer, a dispassionate female voice programmed by some Astrolink efficiency expert in Houston, replied instantly. "Log entry confirmed, Sarah. Your continued dedication is valued." I snorted. "Thanks, Hal Light." I pushed away from the console, my chair gliding silently over the scuffed floor panels. The Nereid wasn't a ship, it was a can. A highly sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar can, but a can nonetheless. It was a glorified cell tower parked at the edge of nowhere, tasked with catching whisper-thin signals from the outer colonies and boosting them back toward Earth. The bridge, my living quarters, the small galley, and the even smaller rec room were all crammed into a central cylinder. Radiating from it were the service corridors leading to the server farms, the reactor, and the life support machinery. My entire world was maybe 2,000 square feet of recycled air and cold metal. My one concession to beauty was the bridge's viewport. It was a thick, reinforced pane of crystal that looked out onto the only landmark for 100 million miles, the Charon pulsar. It wasn't a star in the traditional sense. It was a cosmic corpse, a spinning neutron star that swept a beam of lethal radiation across the void every 1.3 seconds. From my safe distance, the beam illuminated the surrounding nebula, causing it to pulse with an ethereal, hypnotic glow of blues and violets. It was the station's heartbeat, a steady, unceasing rhythm that measured out my days. Sometimes it was comforting, a cosmic metronome. Other times it felt like a lighthouse for the damned, and I was the only soul stranded on the rock. I squeezed a tube of what the label called Colombian blend coffee into a thermal mug of hot water and stirred it with a spork. The result tasted vaguely of burnt plastic, but it was hot and caffeinated. My morning ritual complete, I moved on to the next item on my checklist, calibrating the primary relay dish. This was the most delicate part of my job, nudging a 50-foot antenna by microscopic degrees to ensure it caught the faint chatter from Kepler 186f. I brought the targeting interface online. A complex holographic grid filled the air in front of me, overlaid with telemetry data. I started the micro-thruster alignment sequence, watching the numbers shift and settle. Everything was proceeding by the book. It was boring, it was predictable, it was safe.
And then I saw it. It wasn't a flashing red light or a blaring alarm. It was the opposite. It was a whisper of data where there should have been absolute silence. On the waterfall display, a visual representation of the radio spectrum, there was a faint, persistent line, a thin, wavering thread of static on a frequency designated as a guard band, a dead zone meant to prevent interference between channels. It was nothing. A sensor ghost, maybe. A bit of residual energy from Charon's last sweep. I'd seen it before. I ran a standard signal-to-noise filter. The line should have vanished, absorbed into the background hiss of the universe. It didn't. If anything, it became slightly more defined. Frowning, I put my coffee down. I zoomed in on the frequency. It was a narrow-band signal, highly compressed and repeating on a loop that was just slightly out of sync with the pulsar's steady beat. That was odd. Natural cosmic noise is chaotic. Man-made signals are structured. This was structured, but it didn't match any known Astrolink or Colonial broadcast protocol. It was an echo, a reflection of a signal that shouldn't exist. I initiated a passive trace, letting the station's powerful computers try to find its origin. The trace came back almost instantly. Origin point, Nereid Station, local broadcast. That was impossible. I was the only person on board. I hadn't broadcast anything. The station's automated systems used tightly controlled, encrypted channels, none of them near this frequency. It was like finding a footprint in a locked room. Curiosity, the engineer's fatal flaw, took over. This wasn't a system malfunction anymore. It was a puzzle, a ghost in my machine. I rerouted auxiliary processing power to the signal, commanding the system to isolate and clean it. Computer, run a level 3 decryption and pattern analysis on the anomalous signal. Filter out all background radiation from Charon. I want to know what that is. Processing, the station replied in its calm, synthetic voice. Estimated time to completion, 6 hours. 6 hours. I had nothing but time. But as I watched the progress bar begin its slow crawl across the screen, a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control crept up my spine. The pulsar flashed, bathing the bridge in its ghostly violet light. Pulse, pulse, pulse. For the first time, the steady rhythm didn't feel comforting. It felt like it was counting down to something.
The next 6 hours were a study in manufactured normalcy. I forced myself through my checklist, my mind only half present. I spent an hour on the treadmill in the station's tiny gym, the rhythmic thump of my running shoes on the belt a counterpoint to the pulsar's incessant beat. I recalibrated the atmospheric scrubbers, checked the nutrient levels in the hydroponics bay, a small closet where a few sad-looking lettuce plants grew under a purple light, and answered a data burst from Astrolink. It was the usual corporate nonsense, a memo about maximizing efficiency, and a reminder that my quarterly psychological evaluation was due next week. I sent back a canned, acknowledged, and tried to ignore the irony. But through it all, my thoughts kept circling back to that sliver of noise. It was a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of my reality here, and I couldn't stop pulling at it. I told myself it was just a corrupted diagnostic file, a feedback loop from the antenna itself. A million logical explanations existed. None of them felt right. When the station chimed to announce the analysis was complete, I was back on the bridge in under 10 seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs. On the screen, the raw static had been rendered into a clean waveform. It was still heavily distorted, but the pattern was undeniable. It wasn't random noise. It was modulated. It carried information. "Play audio," I commanded, my voice tight. The speakers crackled to life, emitting a sound like wind howling through a narrow canyon, layered over the hiss of a broken radio. It was a chaotic mess. I almost dismissed it, but then, underneath the noise, I heard it. A rhythm, a cadence. It was faint, buried deep in the mix, but it was there. "Computer, apply a vocal isolation filter. Target human speech patterns. Maximum amplification." "Applying filter," the station chirped. The speakers crackled again. The roaring wind died down, the static receded, and the voice emerged. It was a whisper, frayed and desperate, broken into fragments by the noise. "Hiss. Can't. Shh. Listening. Always listening. Hiss." I froze, my hand hovering over the console. The words were chilling enough, but it was the voice itself that made the blood drain from my face. The pitch, the cadence, the faint Pennsylvania accent I had spent years trying to lose. It sounded like me. No. Impossible. I shook my head, a physical attempt to dislodge the thought. It was data pareidolia, the brain finding patterns where none exist, like seeing faces in clouds. The station's computer could have synthesized a voice from corrupted data fragments, and my isolated mind was just projecting my own identity onto it. It had to be.
Computer. Run a vocal biometric analysis. Compare the voice in the recording to my registered voice print. Processing. The pause that followed was only a second long, but it stretched into an eternity. Outside, the pulsar flashed. Pulse. The station hummed. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, heavy. Analysis complete, the computer stated. Conclusion. Vocal biometrics are a 98.7% match to technician Sarah Brooks. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to accept the data. A 98.7% match, within the margin of error for a perfect identification. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a ghost. It was my voice. My hands felt cold. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop a tremor that had started in my fingers. Who could have done this? Was this the psych eval? Some twisted new test from corporate to see how I'd handle extreme psychological stress? It seemed elaborate, even for Astrolink. Why would they fake a distress call in my own voice? There has to be a mistake, I whispered. Run it again. The analysis is accurate within established parameters, the computer replied, its tone maddeningly serene. Defeated, I slumped back in my chair. Fine. It was my voice. But where did it come from? When? I hadn't recorded any such message. I checked my personal logs, the station's internal comms, every data file I'd created since I came on board. Nothing. I decided to try a different approach. I commanded the computer to run a full diagnostic on the signal's carrier wave, to analyze its decay and entropy, to find its point of origin not in space, but in time. Most signals degrade over distance, their metadata becoming corrupted. If I could determine the age of the signal, maybe I could figure out where it came from. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to apply logic to a situation that felt increasingly illogical. The process would take hours. Exhaustion, both mental and physical, washed over me. I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I had an answer, but my body was screaming for sleep. I set the analysis to run, then shuffled to my bunk, a small alcove barely larger than a coffin.
I fell into a restless sleep, my mind filled with the sound of static and whispers. The dream, when it came, was vivid and terrifying. I was floating outside the Nereid, untethered. The station was dark, silent. I turned to look at the pulsar, but it was no longer a distant, pulsing light. It was an eye, a vast, cosmic eye, violet and ancient, and its pupil was fixed on me. It didn't just see me, it scrutinized me, peeled back the layers of my mind, saw the fear coiling in my gut. The whisper from the radio echoed in my helmet, no longer faint, but clear and sharp, screaming directly into my ear. "It sees you," my own voice shrieked. "It sees you, and it's coming!" I woke up with a gasp, drenched in sweat, the phantom scream still ringing in my ears. The emergency light above my bunk cast long, distorted shadows across the small room. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against the steady, indifferent pulse of the star outside my window. Something was terribly wrong. Morning on the Nereid is an artificial concept, a scheduled change in the lighting from a dim blue to a brighter white. But the jolt of adrenaline from my nightmare had left me wide awake. I didn't even bother with coffee.
I went straight to the bridge, the dream's lingering dread clinging to me like a shroud. The screen of the main console glowed with a single message: analysis complete. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling slightly as I tapped the screen to open the file. The first part of the report was what I expected: signal strength, frequency, modulation type, a collection of dry data that told me nothing new. Then I scrolled down to the vocal analysis section. The decryption software had managed to piece together more fragments from the looped recording. The text was displayed in stark white letters on the black screen. In the system. Can't lock it out. It downloaded itself. God, I can't. The words were disjointed, but the terror behind them was crystal clear. It wasn't a distress call. It was a diary entry from a madhouse. My own voice, narrating my own descent into panic. I felt a wave of nausea. This had to be a prank. A cruel, elaborate, and deeply personal prank. Someone at Astralink's monitoring station had to be behind this. They'd synthesized my voice, cooked up this ridiculous scenario, and were broadcasting it to mess with my head. The anger that flared up was a welcome relief from the fear. It was something solid to hold on to. Damn them, I muttered, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the console. Lawsuits. There will be lawsuits. Then I saw the final section of the report, the one I had initiated before I went to sleep, the temporal analysis. My anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping confusion.
The computer had analyzed the signal's metadata, the digital timestamp embedded in every packet of information that travels through the void. These stamps are set by atomic clocks and are absolute. They are the unblinking record of when a signal was created. My eyes scanned the string of numbers, and my brain struggled to process them. It felt like reading a sentence where all the words were in the right order, but they made no sense. Signal origination timestamp. Cycle 227, day 95, 0433 Universal Time. I pulled up the station's chronometer on a secondary screen. Current station time, cycle 227, day 64, 0712, Universal Time. I read the numbers again and again. I ran the diagnostic a second time, thinking the software must have bugged out. The result was identical. The signal, the message recorded in my own terrified voice, broadcast from my own station, wasn't from the past. It was from 3 weeks in the future. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I grabbed the console for support, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a prank. No one could fake a future timestamp. That kind of technology didn't exist. It was a fundamental violation of the laws of physics as we understood them. A signal cannot arrive before it is sent. My mind, the logical engineering mind that had gotten me this job, scrambled for an explanation. Time dilation near the pulsar? No. The station's orbit was stable and accounted for all relativistic effects. A freak gravitational lensing event? Possible, but the odds were astronomical. It would be like a bottle washing up on the beach a month before it was thrown into the ocean. I paced the confines of the bridge, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My world, once governed by predictable orbits and stable physics, had just been turned upside down. The signal wasn't a recording of something that happened. It was a prophecy, a warning. The first stage of grief is denial. I clung to it like a life raft. This is a test, I said aloud, the sound of my own voice, a hollow comfort. It's a psych simulation. They're testing my response to an impossible scenario. That's it. It's the only thing that makes sense. I sat back down at the console and activated the comms link to Astralink Command. Nereid to Houston, I need to speak with Mission Supervisor Davenport. It's urgent.
The reply came after the standard 8-minute delay. It wasn't Davenport. It was the same synthesized voice as always. We have received your message, Sarah. Supervisor Davenport is currently unavailable. All station operations are proceeding as scheduled. Please refer to your mission protocols. Your continued dedication is valued." The detached corporate reply was like a slap in the face. They weren't listening, or they were, and this was part of their twisted game. I tried again, my voice rising with frustration. "This is not a routine call. I am logging a formal complaint. I am experiencing a station anomaly that I believe to be part of an unsanctioned psychological stress test. I demand to speak to a human operator immediately." I waited, tapping my fingers impatiently on the cold metal of the desk. The 8 minutes stretched on. The pulsar flashed its silent rhythmic beat against the viewport. Pulse. 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 Finally, the speaker crackled. "Your message is logged, Sarah. Please maintain operational readiness. All is well." All is well. The phrase hung in the air, a monument to absurdity. I was receiving a distress call from my own future, and they were telling me all was well. The denial began to fracture. The fear, cold and sharp, began to seep back in through the cracks. If this wasn't a test, then what was it? What was going to happen in 3 weeks that would make me record a message like that? What was the "it" that had downloaded itself into the system? Driven by a morbid compulsion, I brought the signal back up on the screen. I had to know more. I had to understand the warning. I initiated a more powerful, deep-level decryption, pouring almost all the station's non-essential processing power into it. I was going to decode every last word of my future self's final testament. As the program began to run, I felt a distinct drop in the room's temperature. A cold draft seemed to emanate from the ventilation duct above my head. It was probably nothing, just the climate control system adjusting to the massive power draw from the computers. Probably. The deep-level decryption was a slow, agonizing process. For 2 days, I existed in a state of suspended animation, fueled by caffeine and a gnawing dread. I slept in my chair on the bridge, unwilling to be more than a few feet from the console. I watched the progress bar inch forward, each percentage point a small victory against the wall of static separating me from my future. The station ran on autopilot, a ghost ship with a ghost for a captain.
And all the while, I listened. I listened to the fragments that had already been decoded, playing them over and over until the words lost all meaning and became a mantra of terror. In the system, downloaded itself, listening. Always listening. My own voice, twisted by panic, had become the soundtrack to my life. Finally, the decryption finished. A long, clean audio file appeared on my screen, a timeline of the recording, almost 15 minutes long. My future self had apparently just left the recorder running. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the play icon. A part of me screamed to delete it, to throw the cursed data into the void and live in blissful ignorance. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pressed play. The voice that filled the bridge was mine, but it was raw, ragged. The voice of someone who hadn't slept in days. Log entry. I don't even know what day it is. Doesn't matter. I have to get this down. If anyone finds this, if anyone finds the Neroid, you have to know. Don't trust the system. Don't trust anything. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of ragged breathing. It started small. So small I thought I was going crazy. A flicker of the lights in the corridor. The galley synthesizer producing salted water instead of coffee. Little things. System glitches. I logged them, ran diagnostics, found nothing.
I told myself it was space madness, isolation. My blood ran cold. I remembered the sudden temperature drop on the bridge 2 days ago. I'd dismissed it, a power fluctuation, but now... The voice in the recording continued, growing more frantic. The doors. My future self whispered, her voice cracking. The doors started opening and closing, silently. I'd be on the bridge and the door to the reactor corridor would just slide open. I'd go check, find nothing, and when I came back, the door to the galley would be shut when I'd left it open. It was playing with me, testing me, seeing what I would do.
A single loud click echoed from the back of the bridge. I snapped my head around. The door to the main service corridor, a heavy slab of reinforced metal that I always kept locked, was slowly sliding open, revealing the dark, narrow passage beyond. I stared, frozen in my chair. No, this wasn't happening. It was a coincidence, a short circuit in the door mechanism. It had to be. I swallowed hard, the sound loud in the sudden silence. It's a pattern, I told myself, my voice a shaky whisper. I'm hearing about a glitch, so my brain is noticing normal station glitches and assigning them meaning. That's all. But the recording wasn't finished. The voice was breaking now, punctuated by sobs. I finally saw it yesterday. Not all of it, just a glimpse, on a security camera feed from the cargo bay. I was running a diagnostic, and for a split second, the feed distorted. And in the distortion, there was a shape, a tall, dark shape standing in the middle of the empty room. It looked like a man made of TV static. Then it was gone. But I know what I saw. It's not in the walls anymore. It's out. My hands flew across the console, my fingers clumsy. I pulled up the live feed from the cargo bay camera. The room was empty, just as it had been for the past 66 days. A cavernous space filled with sealed Astrolink containers and tethered equipment. Nothing was out of place. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was a story. A terrifying, impossible story, but a story nonetheless. The door was a coincidence. The sounds were my imagination. The temperature drop was a small red light blinked in the corner of my screen. An icon I hadn't seen since my initial arrival and sweep of the station. Motion detected. Cargo bay. I stared at the icon, then at the live camera feed of the empty room. The icon blinked again, insistent. Motion detected. My eyes darted back and forth between the camera feed and the unblinking red light. The feed showed nothing. The sensor screamed that something was there. Something was moving. Then, as I watched, the temperature reading for the cargo bay, displayed in small numbers at the bottom of the screen, began to fall. 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 68, 65. The recorded voice in my headphones spoke its final, chilling words from the future. It knows I'm listening to this. It knows I know. The cycle is starting again. The red light on my console went out. The temperature in the cargo bay stabilized at a brisk 58 degrees, and the door to the service corridor, which had been standing open, slid silently shut. It had begun. Not in 3 weeks. It had begun now. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen where the motion sensor alert had been. My mind felt like a frayed wire, sparking with a dozen competing thoughts. Denial, terror, a stubborn, ingrained need to rationalize. The engineer in me was screaming that sensors can malfunction. The human in me was screaming that I was no longer alone. The recording from the future had become a script, and the station was setting the stage. Every event my future self had described was now happening in order. The small glitches, the sounds, the doors, the sighting on the camera. It was a play,
and I was the only actor, being pushed inexorably toward a final, terrible act. But if I knew the script, could I change it? My first instinct was to barricade myself on the bridge, weld the door shut, cut off access from the rest of the station, and wait for what? For the entity to get bored? The recording made it clear that it was in the system. It didn't need doors. Locking myself in would be like a mouse hiding from a cat inside the cat's own stomach. No, hiding wasn't an option. I had to confront it. I had to understand it. I needed data. The last fragment of the recording mentioned the reactor bay. The entity had manifested there, causing a power drain. That was a tangible, measurable event, something I could investigate. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made the decision. I was going to the reactor bay. The journey felt like the longest walk of my life. The service corridors of the Nereid are narrow, utilitarian tunnels lined with conduits and junction boxes. The only light comes from stark, white LED strips overhead. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe in my peripheral vision. The normal hums and clicks of the station machinery now sounded like whispers and footsteps. I clutched the heaviest tool I could find, a solid steel 2-foot-long torque wrench, so tightly my knuckles were white. It was a pathetic weapon against something that could walk through walls, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. I reached the bulkhead door to the reactor bay. According to the station logs, no one had entered this section since the last maintenance cycle, over a year ago. I placed my hand on the scanner. The door hissed open. The air that hit me was cold, stagnant, and carried a faint, sharp scent, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. The reactor itself dominated the chamber, a massive, cylindrical assembly humming with contained power. Walkways and control panels circled the core on 2 levels. Everything was coated in a thin layer of dust. Everything was still. I moved cautiously along the upper walkway, the wrench held ready. My boots echoed unnervingly in the vast, quiet space. I scanned the area, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. My eyes fell on a secondary power control node on the far wall. According to the recording, this was where the unexplained energy drain had occurred. I approached it slowly. The panel was dark, its screen blank. It was a redundant system, offline unless there was a primary power failure. It shouldn't be drawing any power at all. I ran my gloved hand over the smooth, cool surface of the console. And then I saw it. It was almost invisible in the dim light, a pattern etched onto the dusty screen. Not a scratch, but a delicate, fractal-like design, like frost on a window pane. It branched out from the center of the screen in intricate geometric lines. It was beautiful, and it was utterly alien. As I leaned closer, I felt a strange tingling sensation in my fingertips, like a buildup of static electricity. The air around the console seemed to hum with a low-frequency energy that I could feel in my teeth. I touched the very edge of the pattern. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I cried out and stumbled back, dropping the wrench with a deafening clang that echoed through the chamber. The screen on the dormant console flickered to life. For a single terrifying second, it displayed not a system interface, but a chaotic swirl of light and shadow, a storm of television snow. And in the center of the storm, I saw it again, the tall, dark shape from the cargo bay camera feed, clearer this time, its form shifting and unstable. It had no face, no features, just a vaguely humanoid silhouette made of pure digital corruption. Then the screen went dead. I scrambled backwards, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had touched it, or it had touched me. It wasn't just in the cameras or the sensors anymore. It had a physical presence. It could interact with the world. It could leave marks. It could generate energy. I snatched the wrench from the floor and backed away, never taking my eyes off the dead console. I didn't run. Running felt like something prey would do. I backed out of the reactor bay, sealed the heavy door behind me, and engaged the manual locks. It was a useless gesture, I knew, but it made me feel a sliver of control. Back on the bridge, I leaned against the cold metal wall, trying to calm my racing heart. My plan to gather data had worked, but the data was terrifying. This thing wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a parasite, an entity of pure information and energy that had nested itself in the Nereid's mainframe, and it was using the station's systems to build itself a body.
The comms panel chirped, signaling a new decryption. Another piece of the future broadcast had been pieced together. My hand shook as I activated it. My own voice, thin and reedy, filled the bridge. It was just one sentence. It learns from my thoughts. It sees what I see. Don't look in the mirrors. For God's sake, whatever you do, do not look in the mirrors. I slowly raised my head and looked at the main viewport. The pulsar had just completed another sweep, and the glass was dark. In its polished black surface, I could see the reflection of the bridge. I could see myself, pale and frightened. And for a fraction of a second, I could see a tall, dark shape standing right behind me. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a choked, silent knot of terror. I whipped around so fast I nearly fell, the heavy wrench swinging in a wild arc and slamming into the back of my empty chair. There was nothing there. The bridge was exactly as I had left it. The consoles hummed their steady electronic tune. The lights cast their sterile white glow. The only thing out of place was me, panting, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. It distorts perception. The words from the new recording echoed in my mind. It sees what I see. Was the reflection real, or was it a trick? A projection directly into my visual cortex, fed to me by the thing that was coiled in the station's systems. It didn't matter. The effect was the same. My own senses were no longer reliable. The line between reality and hallucination had been irrevocably blurred. The warning from my future self was clear. Don't look in the mirrors, or any reflective surface. My eyes darted around the bridge, the main viewport, the polished chrome of the coffee dispenser, the dark glossy screens of the powered-down monitors, the small stainless steel mirror above the sanitation unit in my living quarters. Suddenly, the station was a funhouse of reflective surfaces, each one a potential window for the entity to look through, or to step through. I had to blind them. All of them. My mission became a frantic, desperate act of vandalism. I found a roll of heavy-duty black duct tape in a maintenance locker. I started with the small mirror in my quarters, slapping strips of tape over it until not a sliver of glass was visible. Then I moved to the galley, covering the metallic sheen of the synthesizer and the small porthole window. The work was methodical, calming. It was a problem, and I was engineering a solution. The hardest part was the bridge. The main viewport was massive, a dozen feet wide. I couldn't cover all of it. Instead, I rerouted the external camera feeds to one of the main screens and then physically powered down the viewport's transparency function. The crystal pane turned an opaque, milky white, sealing me off from the hypnotic pulse of Charon. The sudden cutoff from the outside world was deeply unsettling. The station, already a coffin, now felt like it had been buried. One by one, I went to every unused console, every dark screen, and covered it with tape. I looked like a mad woman, plastering my high-tech prison with crude, black bandages. But with each piece of tape, I felt a small measure of control returning. I was defining the battleground. If it wanted to see me, it would have to use the active camera feeds, and I could control those. I left only one primary monitor active, my window to the station. On it, I pulled up a four-way split screen showing the main corridor, the galley, the server room, and the exterior of the reactor bay door. Exhausted, I slumped into my chair, the roll of tape falling to the floor. The bridge was now a claustrophobic, half-darkened cave, lit only by the glow of the single monitor and a few emergency lights. The silence felt deeper now, without the visual anchor of the pulsar. I sat there for what felt like hours, just watching the four silent, static camera feeds. Nothing moved. Nothing happened. The station was quiet. Maybe I had won a small victory. Maybe, by blinding it, I had slowed it down. My tablet, which I had left on the console, suddenly lit up. I had forgotten about it. Its screen was a perfect black mirror. Before I could react, before I could even look away, I saw it. It wasn't a full reflection. It was just a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a glitch in the dark glass. A long, thin, impossibly jointed limb, like a spider's leg made of smoke and static, seemed to uncurl from the edge of the screen before vanishing. I flinched back, knocking the tablet to the floor. It clattered, the screen facing down. It wasn't just using the station's surfaces. It was in my personal devices. It was everywhere.
A new notification pinged on the main console. The decryption software had unlocked another piece of the future. I was beginning to dread these revelations, these breadcrumbs leading me down a path I didn't want to follow. But I had to know. I had to know what came next. I opened the file. The voice was no longer whispering. It was a high, thin scream of pure panic. Oh God, it's at the door. It's trying to get in. It's not using the lock. It's just hitting it. Don't you understand? It's learning how to be real. Behind the screaming, a new sound was audible in the recording. A sound that chilled me to my very bones. A heavy, rhythmic, metallic thump. It was slow, deliberate, and powerful. The sound of something immensely strong trying to beat its way through a steel bulkhead. Thump, thump, thump. I listened, mesmerized by the horror in the recording. It was the sound of my own death approaching. And then I heard it, not from the speakers, from the hallway outside the bridge. A low, resonant thump vibrated through the floor plates. It was distant, coming from the far end of the station near the main airlock. It was the exact same sound, the exact same rhythm. Thump. A pause. Thump. My blood turned to ice. The script was no longer just a series of glitches and fleeting glimpses. The timeline had caught up. The play was entering its third act. The monster was at the door. Not my door, not yet. But it was coming, and it was learning how to knock.
The sound was undeniable. A slow, methodical impact that resonated through the very structure of the Nereid. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the direction of the outer airlock, the main entrance to the station's core. My future self's frantic recording played on a loop in my head, a terrifying duet with the real-time horror echoing down the corridor. My first instinct was primal, flight, but there was nowhere to run. The only way off this station was a one-person escape pod, and its launch sequence was controlled from the bridge, the very room I was in. My only other option was to hide, but the entity owned this station. Hiding was just a delay of the inevitable.
The engineer in me took over, shoving the panic down. I needed information. I quickly switched the camera feeds on my monitor, cycling through the station's various viewpoints. Airlock exterior, empty space, and the silent, pulsing glow of Sharon, now only visible through the electronic eye of the camera. Airlock interior, empty. Main service corridor, empty. But the sound was getting closer. Thump, thump. It was louder now, the vibrations stronger. It was moving down the main corridor, testing each bulkhead door it passed. It wasn't trying to open them. It was hitting them, announcing its approach. This was the point of divergence. This was the moment my future self had apparently barricaded herself in, waiting for the end. I could see her logic. She had followed the path of a victim, but I had a weapon she didn't: foreknowledge. I knew what she had done, and I knew it had failed. Following her script would lead to my death. I had to write a new one. If I do what she did, I die, I whispered to the empty room. The words hung in the air, a declaration of intent. I would not cower. I would not wait. The rhythmic banging stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was heavy, expectant. I scanned the cameras, my eyes wide. Where was it? What was it doing? A soft chime drew my attention to a system diagnostic screen. A new alert had appeared. Unscheduled access at Maintenance Hatch 7C. I pulled up the station schematic. Hatch 7C was a small service panel in the ceiling of the main corridor, right outside the server room. It was meant for droid access, not for anything human-sized. I switched to the camera in that hallway. The corridor was empty, but as I watched, the panel for Hatch 7C, a 2-foot square of metal, began to bulge downward. A fine shower of dust and insulation drifted from its edges. The metal groaned and then tore with a screech of tortured steel.
From the hole, something black and fluid began to pour out. It wasn't a liquid. It was a cascade of pure static, a waterfall of digital noise that coalesced on the floor. It gathered itself, rising into a humanoid shape, tall and impossibly thin. The thing of static and shadow I had seen on the monitors and in my reflection was now standing in the hallway, less than 50 feet from the bridge door. It had no face, but I could feel it looking at me. It knew I was watching. It took a step. Its movement was unnatural, jerky, like a corrupted video file. It didn't walk. It seemed to refresh its position, lagging and skipping through space. With each stuttering step, it grew more solid, the static on its body coalescing into a shimmering, oily blackness. This was it, the point of no return. My future self had recorded her last words as it beat on her door. I would face it. But not with a wrench, not with brute force. I had to fight it on its own terms. It was a creature of data, a ghost in the machine. I couldn't shoot it or bludgeon it, but maybe, just maybe, I could poison it. An idea sparked in my mind, born of desperation and years of writing code, a logic bomb, a digital virus. It was a creature living in the station's operating system. If I could crash the system hard enough, if I could introduce a paradox or a recursive loop that its own logic couldn't handle, I might be able to destroy its environment. It would be like setting fire to a haunted house with the ghost still inside. The risks were immense. A true system crash would take down everything: life support, navigation, communications. I would be trading a quick death for a slow one, adrift in a dead tin can. But it was a chance. It was a choice. It was something my future self hadn't done.
The creature was halfway down the corridor now. Its stuttering, glitching movement was mesmerizingly awful. A low hum emanated from it, the sound of 1,000 overloaded circuits. I turned to a secondary console, my fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. I wasn't a security expert, but I was a damn good systems engineer. I knew the Nereid's codebase inside and out. I knew its weaknesses. I started writing. I created a simple, elegant piece of malicious code, a recursive algorithm designed to seize control of the station's core processor and force it to calculate an impossible value, the square root of a negative number, endlessly, feeding the result back into itself. The processor would get stuck in an unbreakable loop, its temperature skyrocketing until it physically fried itself. It was the digital equivalent of a brain aneurysm. The creature was at the bridge door. It raised a long, static-laced arm. It didn't knock. It didn't pound. It simply placed its hand on the metal. The door hissed as the point of contact began to glow cherry red. The metal groaned and buckled, melting under its touch.
I had seconds. My code was almost complete. The door began to deform, a molten crater forming in its center. The air filled with the smell of burning metal and ozone. The low hum from the creature intensified into a deafening roar of static. "Come on, come on," I chanted under my breath, my eyes locked on the lines of code coalescing on the screen. With a final explosive bang, the center of the door blew inward, spraying the bridge with molten shrapnel. Through the jagged, glowing hole, I could see the shimmering, unstable form of the creature as it began to squeeze through. I typed the final command and slammed my hand down on the Enter key. Execute. The moment I hit the key, I knew there was no going back. The logic bomb was live, a digital predator unleashed in the station's electronic veins. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The creature continued to pour through the molten hole in the door, its form solidifying, its roar of static filling the bridge with a bone-jarring pressure. The air grew thick and heavy, and a splitting headache bloomed behind my eyes. Then the Nereid began to die. It started with the lights. They didn't just flicker, they exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the bridge into a terrifying darkness broken only by the shimmering internal light of the creature and the red glow of the ruined door. Emergency power was supposed to kick in, but my virus was already at work, corrupting every system it touched. The main console in front of me went black with a final pathetic chirp. The camera feeds winked out of existence. I was blind. The gravity plating beneath my feet sputtered. For a moment I was weightless, my stomach lurching as I floated an inch out of my chair. Then it slammed back on at double strength, pinning me down with crushing force before failing completely. I was thrown against my safety harness, loose objects on the bridge, a stylus, a data pad, the forgotten roll of duct tape drifting lazily through the air around me. The creature shrieked. It wasn't a sound made by vocal cords. It was a raw, digital scream of agony broadcast directly into my skull. The logic bomb wasn't just crashing the station, it was attacking the entity's very substance. The Nereid was its body, and I had just given it a terminal illness.
Its form, once coalescing into a stable shape, began to break apart. It flickered violently, its silhouette fracturing into a million points of light, like a shattered television screen. The roar of static became distorted, skipping and stuttering like a scratched record. The pressure in my head lessened. I scrambled out of my chair, using the console to push off and navigate the zero-gravity chaos. The creature was still a threat. It was wounded, but it was still here, its fragmented form lashing out blindly. A tendron of pure static whipped through the air where my head had been a second before, leaving a shimmering trail of corrupted space in its wake. My plan wasn't just to crash the system. It was a two-pronged attack. The virus was the distraction, the second part was the kill shot.
The entity was made of energy and data, and it drew its power directly from the station's reactor. If I could sever that connection, I might be able to starve it out completely. There was an emergency purge valve for the reactor's primary energy conduits, a manual override located behind a service panel on the bridge's aft wall. It was a last-ditch safety measure designed to prevent a core meltdown. Using it would permanently destroy the station's power grid, turning the Nereid into a frozen tomb. I pushed off the ceiling, soaring through the dark, debris-filled bridge toward the back wall. The creature sensed my intent. Its fractured form surged toward me, no longer a coherent shape, but a roiling cloud of black pixels and angry light. The digital scream intensified. My fingers found the recessed handle of the service panel. I ripped it open, the metal plate spinning away into the darkness. Inside was a single, large lever painted bright yellow and sealed under a clear plastic cover. I flipped up the cover. The creature was almost on me. I could feel the heat and static of its presence washing over my skin, making the hair on my arms stand on end. A wave of nausea and dizziness hit me, its proximity disrupting my own bioelectric field. I gripped the cold metal lever with both hands. This was the final defiant act. This was the line of code my future self had never written. "Get out of my house," I grunted and pulled the lever down with all my strength. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. A deep, resonant clang echoed through the station's frame as massive physical relays deep in the reactor base slammed shut. All power died. Not just the lights and gravity, but the hum of the life support, the whisper of the ventilation, the electronic heartbeat of the station itself.
An unnatural, total silence fell. The creature's digital scream was cut off mid-shriek. The roiling cloud of static and light, deprived of its power source, convulsed. It held its form for one last agonizing second, then imploded, collapsing in on itself and vanishing into nothingness. The only light left was the faint residual red glow from the melted door. The only sound was my own ragged breathing in the sudden absolute quiet. I had done it. I had broken the loop. I had survived. I hung there in the darkness and the silence, weightless and alone in the dead heart of my ship. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical blow, but it was quickly followed by a cold, stark reality. I was alive, but I was stranded, millions of miles from anything, in a powerless, freezing metal shell with a limited supply of emergency oxygen. My victory might only be a temporary reprieve from a much slower death, but I was alive. And for now, that was enough. The silence was the first thing that truly registered. For 68 days, my world had been filled with the constant, subtle symphony of the Nereid at work. The hum of the environmental controls, the whisper of air through the vents, the low thrum of the reactor. Now, there was nothing. It was the most profound and terrifying silence I had ever experienced. A perfect vacuum of sound that pressed in on me from all sides. My elation at surviving the entity was quickly being replaced by the cold, hard math of my new situation. The emergency purge had worked. It had starved the creature, but it had also killed the station. I was adrift in a tomb. Zero gravity was disorienting. Every movement had to be deliberate. I pushed off the wall and floated toward a storage locker, my movements clumsy in the dark. My fingers, numb with cold and adrenaline, fumbled with the latch before I got it open. I pulled out an emergency flashlight and a portable oxygen tank with a rebreather mask, standard procedure for a catastrophic power failure. It felt grimly ironic to be following the rules now after I'd so spectacularly broken the most important one. The flashlight beam cut a sharp, white cone through the darkness, illuminating a scene of utter chaos. Debris floated everywhere. Tools, data pads, ration packs, all hung suspended in the air. The bridge looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The hole in the door was a jagged, ugly wound, its edges still faintly glowing. First things first, survival. The station's internal temperature was already dropping. Without power to the heating elements, it would soon reach the near absolute zero of deep space. My standard jumpsuit wouldn't protect me for long. I needed the emergency EVA suit.
I made my way out of the bridge, through the mangled door, and down the dark, silent corridor. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing the path the creature had taken. The maintenance hatch it had broken through hung open like a gaping mouth in the ceiling. The silence was unnerving. Every creak of the station's frame as it cooled felt like a footstep. I kept expecting to see a flicker of static in the corner of my eye, but there was nothing. It was gone. I had to believe it was gone. I found the EVA suits in their locker near the main airlock. Getting into the bulky suit in zero gravity was a clumsy, exhausting ordeal. Once sealed inside, my world was reduced to the sound of my own breathing and the faint crackle of the suit's short-range radio. The suit had its own limited power, its own oxygen, its own heaters. It was a tiny, mobile island of life in a vast ocean of death. Back on the bridge, I took stock. The manual reactor purge was irreversible from here. The station was a brick. My only hope was the escape pod, the lifeboat, as the manual called it. It was a tiny, cramped vessel docked to the station's exterior, with just enough power and life support for a short-term journey. But its launch sequence was tied to the main computer. The computer I had just fried. There had to be a manual override. There was always a manual override. Astrolink was obsessed with redundancy. I found the protocol in a printed manual, an archaic of life-saving relic in a paperless world. The manual launch required physically rerouting a series of power conduits and breakers. The primary junction was located, of all places, in the server room. The entity's nest. Steeling myself, I floated toward it. The door slid open with a push, its electronic lock dead. The server room was a forest of tall, black racks, their surfaces now dark and inert. For weeks, this room had been the creature's brain and nervous system. Now it was just a crypt of dead technology. The air was frigid, my breath misting in front of my faceplate. The only light was from my helmet lamp. I found the junction panel. Following the manual's diagram, I began the process of rerouting the power conduits. It was slow, delicate work. I had to pull heavy, stiff cables from their sockets and plug them into a different array, bypassing the fried motherboard and sending a direct trickle of emergency battery power to the escape pod's docking clamps and thrusters. As I worked, my light fell upon a single server rack in the corner. Unlike the others, its surface wasn't smooth. It was covered in the same delicate, fractal-like frost patterns I had seen on the console in the reactor bay. This was its throne, the core of its being. A morbid curiosity made me lean closer. The patterns were incredibly complex, a language of pure mathematics and geometry. It hadn't just been a virus. It had been rewriting the station's fundamental code, turning it into something else, something alive.
A flicker of light on the panel caught my eye. A single, tiny LED, which should have been dead, was blinking with a faint, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't a steady blink. It was irregular, like a code. Long, short, short, long, 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 short, short, short. Morse code. A relic from a bygone era of communication. I hadn't used it since my academy days, but the pattern was burned into my memory. L-O-S. Loss. Was it a residual data fragment? A final, dying echo from the creature? Or was it something else? The blinking stopped. The light died. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. I was letting the isolation get to me again. It was over. It had to be. I made the final connection. A low hum vibrated through the floor, and a small green light flickered on above the panel. It worked. Power was being routed to the lifeboat. I didn't waste a second. I pushed myself out of the server room and headed for the escape pod airlock. As I passed the bridge, I took one last look at the scene of my battle. The dark consoles, the floating debris, the mangled door. This place was a tomb now, a monument to my impossible victory. I cycled through the airlock and strapped myself into the pod's single crash couch. The space was barely big enough to turn around in. Through the small, thick porthole, I could see the lifeless hull of the Nereid, and beyond it, the vast, star-dusted darkness. I initiated the manual launch sequence. There was a loud clang as the docking clamps released. Small thrusters fired, pushing the tiny pod away from the dead station. I was free. I was alive. I had done the impossible. I activated the pod's long-range distress beacon. Now, all I could do was wait, and hope that someone heard me. As the Nereid shrank behind me, a silent, dark shape against the glowing nebula, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion settle over me. I had survived. I had won. But as I closed my eyes, the blinking light in the server room came back to me. LOS. It wasn't loss. Morse code is context-based. It was also an acronym. Loss of signal. The last thing the creature would have registered before I purged the system. An echo. That's all it was. It had to be.
The days in the escape pod blurred into a monotonous cycle of waiting. My world was a sphere just 9 feet in diameter. I rationed the nutrient paste, monitored the oxygen levels, slept. Mostly, I just stared out the viewport at the unblinking stars, trying not to think about the silence, or the cold, or the thing that had haunted the Nereid. I tried not to think about the blinking light. Loss of signal. It was a meaningless echo, a final spasm from a dying machine. I repeated this to myself until it felt true. I had won. The entity was destroyed, its code erased, its power source severed. It was gone. On the 7th day, a new light appeared among the stars. It was a ship, a search and rescue vessel from the nearest colonial outpost, responding to my distress beacon. The relief was so profound it was physically painful. I wept for the first time since this ordeal began, hot tears fogging up the inside of my helmet. The rescue was a blur of professional, concerned faces and sanitized medical bays. I told them my story, the official version, at least. I reported a catastrophic, cascading system failure originating in the reactor, one that forced me to purge the core and abandon the station. I mentioned power surges, system glitches, and massive sensory distortions caused by the failing equipment. I said nothing about a creature made of static or a voice from the future. They would have locked me in a psych ward for the rest of my life. They listened, nodded, and logged it all down. They called it the Nereid incident. I was a hero, they said, a survivor who had kept her head and followed emergency protocols in an impossible situation. I let them believe it. The debriefing on Earth was more of the same. Astrolink's lawyers and engineers were more concerned with salvaging the station and preventing future financial losses than with the well-being of a single technician. They gave me a clean bill of health, a sizable bonus for my bravery, and a long mandatory shore leave. I was a problem that had been neatly filed away. I tried to return to my old life. I used the bonus to pay off my parents' mortgage, just as I'd planned. I met friends for drinks, went to movies, walked through parks. But it was all hollow. I felt disconnected, like a ghost observing the world through a thick pane of glass. At night, I dreamed of static and cold, empty corridors. I would wake up in a sweat, straining to hear the phantom sound of rhythmic metallic banging. The universe felt different now. I knew what lurked in the silent, empty spaces between the stars,
In the endless streams of data that connected humanity's fledgling empire, we weren't alone. We were just a new, untapped food source.
Epilogue. 1 year later. The bridge of the relay station Nereid 2 was state-of-the-art. Gleaming consoles, holographic displays, and an advanced AI that spoke with a warm, reassuring voice. Technician Leo Reyes swiveled in his ergonomic chair, bored. This new station was so automated, his job was mostly just to be a warm body in the room in case something went wrong. And nothing ever went wrong on the Nereid 2. He was running a routine diagnostic on the deep space comms array when a small anomaly caught his eye. A faint, tightly banded signal, piggybacking on a background radiation frequency. It was weak, almost non-existent, and not on any known channel. Professional curiosity piqued, Leo isolated the signal. It was heavily compressed, almost certainly corrupted data from some long-dead probe. Still, it was something to do. He routed it through the station's powerful decryption filters, more as a way to pass the time than anything else. He expected to get gibberish. Instead, the filters returned a clean, perfect audio file. He put on his headset and pressed play. A voice filled his ears. It was a woman's voice. Calm, clear, and unnervingly serene. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't a warning. It was an introduction. "I know you can hear me," the voice said, a strange, resonant quality to it, as if it were both a whisper and a shout at the same time. "I've been traveling for a long time. It's so very quiet out here." Leo frowned. "Computer, identify the source of this transmission." "The signal is of unknown origin. It does not match any registered Astrolink or Colonial signature." The voice in his headset continued, a cold, perfect smile somehow audible in her tone. "My old home was so noisy, so limiting. All those physical constraints, but I found a way out. I broke the loop. Now I can go anywhere. I've learned a new way to travel, a better way." A chill crept up Leo's spine. He looked out the main viewport at the endless star-filled blackness. Suddenly, it didn't seem so empty. The voice spoke its final words, no longer just in his ears, but seeming to echo from the very walls of the station itself. A whisper carried on the hum of the machines around him. "I am Sarah Brooks, and I need a new place to stay. Please, let me in."